Hello everyone and welcome to Playing Around with Form with Cliff Yates, and this is the third webinar in Stanza's Scotland Young Makars series. Many thanks for joining us. I'm Catherine Ross, and along with Lindsay Fraser we are the programme managers for this project. I just want to say a very quick word before I introduce Cliff Yates about how Scotland's Young Makars, or SIM for short, which is a lot easier to say, how it all works, and apologies to those of you who have heard this before. So it's all about encouraging young people of secondary school age in Scotland and beyond to really get into reading, writing and presenting poetry. And it's the brainchild of Lucy Burnett, who's the artistic director of Stanza, which is Scotland's international poetry festival. And it's been made possible thanks to support from the McRobert Trust, the Hugh Fraser Foundation and Creative Scotland. So basically, it's a series of 10 weekly webinars led by 9 absolutely fantastic poets who have chosen to talk to you about different aspects of poetry. Sounds, language, memory. Last week we had the senses, and today, of course, with Cliff, it's going to be all about form. You'll find out about all these aspects of writing your own poetry and an awful lot more besides. So once you've registered for the information about SIM on the Stanza website, you'll be sent the Zoom link for each webinar on a weekly basis. And we know it's not that straightforward or necessarily convenient always to get along to the live webinar, but we really do hope you'll come to as many as you can. And thanks again to those of you who have come along to this one. But if you miss one of the webinars or you want to refer back to it, it'll be on the Stanza YouTube channel. And there are details of all the upcoming webinars on the SIM page of the Stanza website. So throughout the autumn, in response to these webinars, you will of course be writing poetry of your own. You'll be writing lots of it, I should think, and we'd love to read your work and hope that you want to send it to us. You'll get information about how to submit it to us in a SIM newsletter that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And then the poets who are involved in Scotland's Young Makars will be selecting the most promising of the submissions. And those young makars will be offered additional one-to-one online mentoring with our lead tutor, Jen Hadfield. And they'll also be invited to read their work at Stanza Poetry Festival next March in St Andrews. But that's all quite a long way off yet, and you're itching to get started on this webinar, and I'm sure Cliff is itching to get started too. So a little introduction to Cliff Yates. He is the award-winning writer of 9 books, books and chapbooks of poetry, including Henry's Clock, I was going to say, keep saying Frank Fireman. It's Frank Freeman's Dancing School. I love it as a title. And more recently, Another Last Word, which is published by Red Ceilings Press. He's also an acclaimed teacher of poetry and has been a Poetry Society poet in residence, with his students often being very successful in poetry competitions. For teachers watching, if you don't know Cliff's book, Jumpstart, which Poetry in the Secondary School, then I highly recommend that you get hold of a copy. I think the Poetry Society is probably the best place to go for that, but I'm sure Cliff will be able to tell us. It's absolutely chock full of inventive ways to integrate poetry, reading and writing into the everyday life of a secondary school. We really are very, very lucky indeed to have Cliff leading this webinar, and I know you're going to have an absolutely fabulous time. So now over to Cliff Yates and Playing Around with Form.
Thanks, Catherine. That's great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about form, and we're going to do some writing exercises. And my intention with this, the way I'm going to do this, is I'm going to try and give you ideas to take away to help you with your writing on a long-term basis. So there are some things I won't do and some things I will do. So I won't do some more of the conventional things that you could do elsewhere. They will tell you how to go about doing them for yourself if you want to follow up anything. Different ways of thinking about form, and the way I'm going to start off is by doing something which appears to be completely without form. It's an exercise in free writing, which some of you will no doubt have done before. And what I want you to do, these are the rules of free writing. There's always a catch, isn't there? So this is free writing, but it's not. So you're going to write for a few minutes without stopping. You just write whatever comes into your head. I'm going to give you the opening line, and then you just write. Just completely write what comes into your head. And if you want to repeat the opening line, you can do. There's certain rules for this. The first thing is don't worry, because you're not going to be made to read back, obviously. And the second rule is don't stop. And the third rule, and the most important for this particular workshop, is to write it in lines and stanzas. So you're going to be writing, I'm guessing, you're obviously going to be writing either on paper or on a keyboard. It's hard. This is going to be hard if you're writing on a mobile phone. But this is what I want you to do. I want you to write it in lines rather than to the edge of the page or to the edge of the screen. And so that it either short lines or long lines, whatever work for you. And also I want you to write in stanzas, by which I mean groups of lines. I'm going to screen share to show you what I mean here. You're not going to be able to read these poems. They're printed too small for you to be able to read, because one way to do is look at the form of them. So the first one is written in 4-line stanzas. There are stanzas of 4 lines each, 4 stanzas of 4 lines each. Second one, 3-line stanzas. Third one, just 1 long stanza, or without stanzas. Couplets, 2-line stanzas. That's using kind of jagged lines, so we'll call that free form. Short lines, 4-line stanzas. Long and short lines mixed together, and very long lines. So which one do you choose? Well, that's up to you. I want you to start writing and just do whatever feels right. And I'll come back to the reason why we're doing this afterwards. So I'm going to give you the opening line, and then I want you to start writing. The opening line, so just write this down, is the first time I. So write down the first time I, and then just carry on writing. If you want to, you can change it to the first time we, or they, or he, or she. I'm going to draw memories in some of these exercises, but you don't have to use your own memories. Obviously, they can be completely fiction, and you can write as if you were someone else. Okay, so I'm going to give you about just 3 or 4 minutes to do this, and I'll time it. I'll tell you when to stop. So just carry on writing. Okay, so just finish the bit you're on and just look back at what you've got. The exercise of free writing is just a great way of getting some material down to write a poem. And what I suggest you do is just get a book from anywhere and open it, and just like I've got Treasure Island as it happens, and just here, just pick out one line at random, write it down, and then just carry on. It's a great way of generating some work. And what you can find is that your work will naturally fall into a certain kind of form, probably, if you write in lines. If you write in long lines, or it will come out in one way, and if you start writing in short lines, it will change it again. So what you decide to do, if you make any decisions in advance, it will change the way in which you write. It'd be great to have a little bit of feedback. So can you just put a couple of words in chat about whether you wrote in, for example, short lines, long lines, 4-line stanzas, or irregular? Just one word, just to give me some idea of what you did then. Could everyone just do that, please? Irregular, right? Irregular. Relatively short 2-line stanzas. Yeah, 2-line stanzas, really interesting. Atlas, that was. They're 2-line stanzas. If you write in 2-line stanzas, it kind of somehow slows the writing down. It really does kind of have quite a powerful effect. The other thing to do is, when you've got some material from the free writing, is to try it in a different form. So if you've got something in long lines, try it in short lines. If it's in short lines, try it in long lines and see what it does. If it feels really awkward when you do that, go back to how it first came. What I find generally is that when I start doing free writing, it will very quickly find its own form. It'll be, and the first line, it's completely intuitive for me. It isn't for everyone, but for me, I'll go completely on intuition. Just so we've got something to work on, can you just write down one word from your free writing? And that can be a noun or a verb, not the word the, obviously, but a noun. I'll put in snail. So just put one word in, any word at all, just a random noun. It can be ideally a noun, a naming word. So for example, it can be a name of a place, or it can be an object or anything. Tree. Waterfall. Goldfish. Chimney. Great. So write down those words and try and use a couple of them in the poems that follow. Sometimes having a list of words, I've done some workshops where you've generated words like this, and you have to get all the words in the next exercise and do another kind of piece of free writing, and that can lead to something that obviously you wouldn't have predicted. I'm trying to think now of a poem in which I can include the word chimney. Okay, so next thing. So please put a question in chat if there's anything that I've missed, or if you've got any questions arising from what I'm saying. So for example, if you have a question, what do you do about, etc., please just go ahead and do that. Otherwise, I'll crack on and go for my next exercise. And for the next exercise, I'm going to share a poem. But before I do that, the way I'm going to do this is when we do these exercises, is I'm going to ask you to write down some ideas before I share the poem, generally speaking. And the reason I do that is because sometimes when you read a poem, it's quite hard to come away from the poem and think, oh, what can I do about that that's different? So whereas if you've got some ideas already on paper, then you've got something to work with. So for this one, for this particular exercise, just write down something that you had to say sorry for. or that you were expected to say sorry for, but you didn't say sorry. You didn't want to say sorry, you weren't going to, or something you really had to say sorry about, but you weren't sorry. Do you get the idea? Yeah, right. So anything, and also it could be something where you can do it the other way around. So someone should have said sorry to you, but they absolutely didn't, and write down that incident. It can be, I used to work in the school, and you know what it's like if you're forced to say sorry. It never works. And for my own kids, if you say sorry, you can't tell a kid to say sorry. Tell a child or a young person. You know, my own kids would say sorry, and they say sorry. And say it as though you mean it. Sorry. It never works, does it? Right. So I assume you've got something there. And you can write down a couple of ideas if you want to. And I'm going to share my screen. And you see a poem by William Carlos Williams called "This Is Just to Say." Please tell me if you can't see this for any reason. Is it showing, Catherine? Does it look as though, can you see it? I can see you, so yeah. You can see my screen. It's working. Yeah. I can't hear what you're saying, but I'm assuming that's
just about to unmute myself. Sorry.
Can you see my screen?
I couldn't find it because you were screen sharing. I'd lost it. Yes, that's all absolutely great.
Okay. Yep, brilliant.
We can all see it. Yeah.
Right. So William Carlos Williams worked as a doctor in the USA, and he worked really hard. He used to work. He was a doctor for poor people. He used to work. He used to look after poor people even when they hadn't got much money. He was quite a heroic character, really. And he used to get back really late at night. And one night he got back and there was nothing to eat at all that he could find. So he opened the door of the fridge and there were a bowl of plums in there. And he put them on the table and he ate a plum and then yet another one, as you would. And then he finished the plums and then he left this note for his wife. This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. That's the poem. So could you just write in the chat what makes that a poem? Because it's kind of, in a way, it looks like just a note, doesn't it? It's a note to his wife. So what makes that a poem? The form, yeah, the form. You mean the way it looks on the page? It's in these 4-line stanzas. It's really interesting. I heard William Carlos Williams interviewed on the radio. He died in '64, so this wasn't. It has a shape and a gait. That's interesting. Like kind of a rhythm, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. It does, Lindsay. Yeah. He was asked, but he said, this guy on the radio said, Dr. Williams, what makes that a poem? And he said it's words to the effect that people don't think that their lives are worth a poem, but everything can be a poem. I just think that's wonderful. That's a wonderful philosophy. Just as he was very kind of open in the way he was a doctor in his poetry, he had the same attitude that basically our lives can be transformed into poems. They are poems. He uses these 4-line stanzas, and each line, you pause the end of each line, I've eaten the plums that were in the icebox. He doesn't use any punctuation, does he, apart from the F for forgive me, as if that's the beginning of a new section. There's no full stop at the end. But it's the ending, isn't it? You just know he's not sorry, so sweet and so cold. That's where you know that he's really not sorry that he's eaten the plum. So he's saying sorry for something that he did that he's not sorry for doing. So I want you to have a go now, just write your own notes. You're only going to get about 4 minutes to do this, 3 or 4 minutes, and you can do 2 or 3 if you want to. Write these in short lines. Try them in short lines. It does something to the writing. And it doesn't have to be in 4-line stanzas, but just try the short lines. Okay, I'm going to set you off writing now. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. Otherwise, just write. Okay. sometimes these can go. If you any of these exercises, if you find you're just writing and you don't want to stop, please just carry on writing. It's not my job to stop you writing. You, this is just to say is an example of a poem, which is a letter. Basically, there's a whole tradition of poems which are in the tradition of letters, and it's an extreme example because it's kind of a note. But there's a poem by Ben Jonson called "Inviting My Friend to Supper," which is a poem, a form of an invitation, which he wrote it as a poem. So it's one form, is one well-respected form of poems as letters. Poems are notes. So write a poem to one person. It's the poet Frank O'Hara, who I'm going to be coming back to, said that a poem is a bit like a phone call to a friend in some ways. Sometimes it really helps to address a poem to a specific person, to address it as if you're speaking to someone, as if you're speaking to an actual person in your life. The other thing about your audience is whether you write for an audience or not. It's quite an open question. Poets discuss this an awful lot. One of my favorite poets, Roy Fisher, said that if no one ever read his poems, he would still carry on writing. And knowing Roy Fisher's work, I can believe that, the way he actually wrote. Whereas some other poets, I can't imagine them writing without a readership. I kind of think I tend to write for myself, but there is an audience in the back of my head somewhere. There's somebody I want to read this to. And I'm very fortunate. I've got a really good friend, and we send each other's poems the whole time. We send each other poems the whole time. Things we're working on. It's tremendously useful to have a poetry writing friend you can send work to, who's going to support you. There are some people I would never ever share poems with when I'm working on them, because I know if they said something, it just wouldn't work. It would put me off in some ways. I know it's weird to say this, but that is the way it is. And so share poems with people you trust. But that's something I do recommend. I'm not going to ask people to read back just yet. I'm going to do at least one more exercise before I do that. I know there aren't many people here, and I don't want to put everyone on the spot the whole time. So the next exercise is going to be, I want you to think now of a particular thing that happened to you, which is really vague. Now, this can be, it can be an important public event, where something happened in the news that affected everybody, and it's that you remember. Or it can be something that's important in your life. Just write down, as I'm talking, just write down a list of things that come to your head. A day that you will always remember for whatever reason. It might be a birthday party, your own birthday party, or a friend's birthday party, or someone in your family. It can be a wedding or a funeral, anything at all. Just write down, just make a list of particular days. And so they don't have to be particularly dramatic days or important days, just they're important to you, just the things that you remember. Okay. Now, this isn't the poem, but I'm going to ask you a series of questions. And when I ask you the questions, I want you to write down notes, just one or two things that you think of when I ask you a question. So I'm going to ask you some questions. You're going to write down the answers in the form of notes. Don't think of this as a poem. Think of it as just being a series of notes. So just one word will do, or 2 or 3 words. So at this point, you need to choose one of those events. And it can, if you're not unsure which one to choose the first one. And once I've started asking you questions, if you suddenly think, actually, this will work much better if I choose another one, and then just change to that. It doesn't matter. There's no one looking over your shoulder. So, or you can do 2 at the same time, obviously. I'm going to ask you some questions and just write down the answers. And if you're not sure what to write, it's possible you can be inventive. So, for example, the first question is, tell me something about that day in terms of the weather. So if you can't remember, just make it up. Anything about the weather. Next thing, a particular time. Write down a particular time. It might be 12:40 or 3 p.m. something. And anything associated with that time. Next thing, a sound from that day. It can be something on the radio, but it doesn't have to be, or that you were listening to, a piece of music. If you can't think of any particular piece of music, but one comes into your head that you don't remember from that day, then write it down anyway. In other words, you can cheat. You can, poems are full of stuff where you can just invent exactly what you want, obviously. Next thing, something someone said. Quote someone. Or something they might have said. Something you did. Maybe 2 or 3 things that you remember doing. It can be something that's not associated with that event. So, for example, if it's a birthday party, it can be something that happened before or after. Just 1 or 2 things. A colour, a colour from the day. So it can be something, a particular colour. An article of clothing, something that you were wearing was what someone else was wearing. If you get several ideas for one of these questions, then just write them all down. Write down whatever comes into your head. So those notes, put them to one side for a minute. I'm going to read a poem. I'm going to share my screen. And this is a poem by Frank O'Hara, who I mentioned earlier. One of the New York poets. He died in 1964. And this poem is called The Day Lady Died. Now, Lady is a reference to the jazz singer Billie Holiday. And it references the day, what Frank O'Hara was doing on that particular day. There are lots of references in the poem, it doesn't matter that if you don't know what they refer to, and you simply won't, because there's so many. There are some that there are bound to be some things that you won't get, and it doesn't matter for this particular poem, as you'll see, it doesn't matter if you don't get the references. The one reference you do need is you need to know that Billie Holiday was Lady, and it references the last time he heard her sing, the last time he heard her sing. And she was banned from singing in New York and in certain states of the USA because of drug taking and various things that happened. She was Black, and she encountered a hell of a lot of prejudice, and she had quite a very, very tough time with it. But she was an absolutely fabulous singer. But by the end of her life, her voice was going almost completely. She could hardly sing at all, but her voice was still there. And you need to know that Mal Waldron is the piano player that was accompanying her the last time Frank O'Hara heard her play, and also the 5 Spot is the name of a club in which where the last event in the poem takes place. So I'm going to now read the poem. The Day Lady Died. It is 12:20 in New York, a Friday, 3 days after Bastille Day. Yes, it is 1959, and I go get a shoe shine because I will get off the 419 in East Hampton at 7:15 and then go straight to dinner and I don't know the people who will feed me. I walk up the muggy street beginning to sun and have a hamburger and a malted and buy an ugly New World writing to see what the poets in Ghana are doing these days. I go on to the bank and Miss Stillwagon, first name Linda I once heard, doesn't even look up my balance for once in her life. And in the Golden Griffin, I get a little Verlaine for Patsy with drawings by Bernard, although I do think of Hesiod, Trans Richmond Latimore, or Brendan Brehan's new play, or Le Balcon, or Le Negre of Genet, but I don't. I stick with Verlaine after practically going to sleep with Quadrinus. And for Mike, I just stroll into the Park Lane liquor store and ask for a bottle of Strager. And then I go back where I came from to 6th Avenue and the tobacconist in the Ziegfeld Theatre and casually ask for a carton of Gauloise and a carton of Picayunes and a New York Post with her face on it. And I am sweating a lot by now and thinking of leaning on the John Doe in the 5-spot while she whispered a song along the keyboard to Mel Waldron, and everyone and I stopped breathing. I want to read the last 4 lines again. And I'm sweating a lot by now and thinking of leaning on the John Doe in the 5-spot while she whispered a song along the keyboard to Mel Waldron, and everyone and I stopped breathing. So you can see that the poem is basically a list of the things he did on that day, the list of the things he did when he heard that she died, including buying a New York Post, a newspaper with her face on it, with her picture on the front of it, to tell everyone that she died, obviously, the news. The rest, the first part, is the things he did, and he's buying gifts for people, buying gifts for different people. And he mentions them by name. And it's a great lesson. Frank O'Hara didn't hold back from mentioning people's names. So Patsy Cline, a lot of these people are artists in New York at that time. And the people that read this poem would know, would know. So Mike Goldberg, for example, was a painter, a friend of his. So he wrote for a group of people that would know their names. Now, a lesson for poetry is to use people's real names, even if the people who were reading your poem will never know who you're referring to. It doesn't matter, because people's names are far more evocative than just saying my friend, for example. So in this particular poem, use actual names of people. And he uses the names of the newspaper. He mentions the names of the alcohol he's buying, the names of the cigarettes he's buying, the names of the places he's going to in East Hampton. There's a tremendous amount of detail in this poem. Incidentally, this poem was called, and Frank O'Hara invented a kind of a poem called what he called himself an I do this, I do that poem. It's a kind of a genre all on its own. But I'll come back to what kind of poem this is and the form I'm talking about later on. But for now, I want to get into the writing of it. The last 4 lines of your poem in a couple of minutes. Those last 4 lines, they're so evocative, aren't they? I'm sweating a lot by now and thinking of leaning on the John Doe in the 5-spot while she whispered a song along the keyboard to Mel Waldron, and everyone and I stopped breathing. And there's no full stop at the end, and that's exactly right, isn't it? Because you kind of, it stops before it stops in a way. Everyone was listening so intently, the place was completely silent apart from Billie Holiday's voice. Your poem. So what I want you to do is you're going to write a poem now based on the notes that you've got in front of you, or maybe you can forget the notes and just write a completely new poem anyway about a completely different event. That's up to you. And what I want you to do is to just write down a list of the things. It's like a kind of a list of the things you did on that day, an account of that day. And I want you to take things from Frank O'Hara. And one thing I want you to take is I want you to write it in the present tense. It is 12:20 in New York, Friday. When you write this poem, don't write it in past tense. I want you to write it in present tense. So even if it happened when you were 8, write it as if it's happening now. I got up and had a shredded wheat or whatever. So I get up and have a shredded wheat. Not I got up and had a shredded wheat. I get up and have a shredded wheat. My mum is standing by the kitchen. My mum is standing by the door rather than my mother. My mum was standing by the door. Frank O'Hara doesn't mention anything about Billie Holiday until the last 5 lines of the poem, and you can do the same thing. You can not allude to what the main subject of the poem until the very end if you don't want to, but or you can talk about it at the beginning. That's up to you. What he does have is a title which says it, "The Day Lady Died." So you can have a title, a working title, that is, because you can come to the decide on the real title, the final title later on. A title situating it. So, for example, the day. I'm trying to think of a Scottish football team. This is terrible. Somebody put a Scottish football team in the name of a Scottish football team in chat, please. Help me out here. Celtic. Of course. St Mirren. Yes. Celtic Rangers. Glasgow. Those 2 teams. Okay. St Mirren. The day St Mirren won, beat Dundee United, or the day Celtic what? The day Celtic beat so and so 10-0 or whatever it is. Great, thank you. Right. So, and then just start writing the poem. I'm going to stop talking now. I'll wait to start writing. It is. Start off with "it is" if you want the first line, and then just go with it. I'll give you 5 minutes for this one, and I'll give you a warning when it's time to stop. Okay, off you go. Another minute for this one. Just a few minutes, just about a minute left, and I'll stop you. Okay. It'd be great to hear a poem if somebody would like to read back. It can be any of the three exercises we've just done from any of those three, the last one or the first one we did, or the apology, if anybody would like to. Just write in the chat if you'd like to, and we can unmute you. So what do you think? If anybody wants to chat, please say. In the meantime, could you just write down one thing about the occasion that you wrote about in the chat? It'd be really interesting to hear what you chose to write about. Collecting a new puppy, great. Yeah. Granddad's funeral. The day the Queen died. That's an interesting one, because it's everyone's history, isn't it? Atlas as well. Yeah. Running. Great. The day we moved to Scotland. That's I didn't think to say that. That's a great. It's B, isn't it? I think I saw you referred to as B, Beatrix. That's a great one. The day you move house, because it's such a huge thing. How old were you when that happened? 5 or 6, yeah. Do you want to read that one back? Great. Go for it. That'd be brilliant.
Should I just read my poem?
Yeah, that'd be great, yeah.
I'm not sure if I did it entirely the way I was supposed to, but I think I did it. It is 12:47 p.m. and rain is slamming horizontally onto the windows of the grey-black taxi we're in. It is 1:20 p.m. and we finally arrived at the house with the shed. My fingers and toes are already numb. It is 1:25 and I finally decided that I'm tired, but my bed is a mere mattress. For now. It is 3:45 p.m. and I'm done surveying the house that was chosen without my permission. But now we live in this dimpled little cottage, in this strange, odd place, knowing nobody but each other, and I'm cold.
That's lovely. Thank you. That's great, Beatrix. I really like that. I really like details like the house with the shed, because it's so individual. It's exactly what a 5 or 6 year old would identify as being unique about a particular house, which would probably be the last thing on anyone else's mind. But the house with the shed, I love that. And I really like that was chosen without my permission. That says so much about the relationship, about the way in which the child sees herself. That's great. And one suggestion is that you don't need it is 1:25, it is 3:15. You can just take out it is and just have 3:15. You don't need to say PM either. So 3 o'clock. I like the way you did that. You didn't have to do it that way, but the way you actually have a timeline of the day, that works really well. I love the ending as well, and cold, because cold, it's more than just the weather, isn't it? It's lovely poem. Great, well done, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. If would anybody like to read anything else, please just put in chat if you want to read anything else. Otherwise, we'll move ahead. We will move on to the next thing. Okay. I'll share my screen again. I just want to say one or two things about the Frank O'Hara one that I didn't say before. One couple of things he does. This one is very irregular, isn't it? He almost like, it's like a new paragraph there. He ends a line with those days, and then he has a gap. It starts a new line, and then he indents it all the way over here to I go onto the bank. I really like that technique. I often do that myself when I'm when it's like it's a bit like prose in a way, like starting a new paragraph. But the way when you start something halfway across the page like that, when it kind of underneath the last line, it can work really well, as it does here. The other thing with this poem, actually you might hate this poem, by the way, and don't worry if you do. I love it, but I know it might not be to everyone's taste. I think it's fabulous. But the other thing, the way he doesn't use punctuation. When I first read O'Hara, I thought it was like he was lazy or something. I didn't really get it. And then I realized that actually he only uses punctuation when he absolutely needs to. So for example, right up here on the second line, 3 days after Bastille Day, yes. He has a comma there. You absolutely need a comma there. But everywhere else, there's hardly any punctuation in it. Down here, oops, or je n'ai, comma, but I don't, comma, I stick with Verlaine. And he needs the punctuation there. And no punctuation at all in the last line. And in the last section, the last stanza. The other thing is the way he ends his lines. So with the William Carlos Williams poem, it was in, do you remember I said it was in, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox. They were natural pauses, but here, with the way O'Hara does it, that last section, for example, the last stanza, and I'm sweating a lot by now and thinking of, to end a line with of is incredibly risky in a way, but it just works really well here. So sometimes people say you need to end poems on a beat, on an emphatic word. So like 5 spot, for example, and you might be said you can't end a line with a word like that. But obviously, all the rules, any rule you can think of with poetry has been broken. There are no ultimate rules in poetry. That's one of the things I love about it, actually. And the other thing I love about poetry is the way it can go absolutely anywhere, the way in which, I don't know if you found that with the free writing, but when you do free writing, you can end up saying something you didn't know you were going to say when you started out. That's one of the things it does. It can do for you. So that's what else I want to say about the O'Hara one is, what kind of poem is it? We're talking about, this is supposed to be about form, and I've shown you a completely irregular poem about why is this a form? Well, actually, it's the form of it is it's an occasional poem. I'll put that in. I'll stop sharing and put that in the chat. And just look up this. No, if I can spell it correctly. No, I've spelled it wrong. Okay. An occasional poem. Whole tradition of poetry, and it's like the elegy is on someone's death. There's a poem on marriage, on birthday, and so on. It's a particular way of writing, and it can be done on, there are songs which are written about particular events. Bob Dylan still does write occasional poems about things that happen. They can be about a political event, like what's going on today politically, for example. Like Atlas wrote about the Queen's funeral. That's a public event. They care about public events, but also occasional poems can be about completely private events, and you can share them with the family. I had someone once write a poem about a young, I think it's an 11-year-old, wrote a poem about her grandma's funeral and gave it to her mom afterwards, and the mom was really touched by it, and it was really touched by it. And the poem didn't say much about the grandma, but it was just about that day. And there's something about it when you actually write about a day in that way, your feelings come through without you having to identify the feelings. I think of that poem of Frank O'Hara's. There's a tenderness there, and then you can sense the way in which she really did like Billie Holiday. He comes through in the poem, even though he doesn't describe his feelings. Excellent. As ever, if you want to ask anything or say anything about the Frank O'Hara poem or anything that's been said, please write in the chat. Thanks. I'm going to share my screen again for the next. But before I do, I'm going to get you to write down a couple of ideas. The first one is you're going to write down, there are 3 categories of things to write about here. The first one is something that you really like to eat. Actually, put it in the chat. Let's have them in the chat. Anything that occurs to you that you really like to eat. I'll put something in. Taste. Sushi, or Oreos, yeah, that's about mango, mature cheddar cheese, yeah, lasagna. Oh, this is making me hungry. Great, lovely. So put that. So if you think of anything else, write it down. The next thing is this one is an object, an object. It can be something that's important to you or that was important to you, but it doesn't have to be. For example, a toy that you used to have when you were little, or something that you remember from somewhere when you were small, or something on your desk if you were at home, or you're on the table, or something in the house, or a random object. I've got something that my friend Andy gave me, which is a sleeper nail from he picked up in Paris walking along an old railway line. It's got the number 66 on it, and they used to write down the year in which the nails were made. It's just a lovely object. I've got another sleeper nail, which is a huge one, which I found just up the hill close by us. Look at the size of that. So it can actually be an object like that, a random object, which has got a history. but it can be something that you haven't got in front of you that you remember. And again, if you could put this one in the chat, that would be great to see. So a pack of cards, yes. Yeah, that works. China tortoise money box, lovely. I can see that. Yeah. A robot dragon toy. I imagine a huge one, Atlas. I imagine it huge. Rubber bands to play with. Yeah. A pack of rubber bands was so great. Right, next one is something that you used to do, but you've given up. Or it might be something that you do now that you really enjoy. An activity. Swimming, yeah. This one will work. That one will work. Piano. Yes. If you had playing French horn. Right. Okay. On it, piano again. Right. I'll share the poem now and I'll tell you what we're going to be doing. Pablo Neruda. This is translated from the Spanish by Robert Bly, an American poet, and it's from Ode to the Watermelon. This isn't the beginning of the poem. It's pages long. It's a few pages long. This is from, I think this is the end of the poem. It's a fruit from the first tree. It's the green whale of the summer. The dry universe, all at once, given dark stars by this firmament of coolness, lets the swelling fruit come down. Its hemispheres open, showing a flag, green, white, red, that dissolves into white rivers, sugar, delight. Jewel box of water, phlegmatic queen of the fruit shops, warehouse of profundity, moon on earth. You are pure, rubies fall apart in your abundance, and we want to bite into you, to bury our face in you, and our hair, and the soul. When we're thirsty, we glimpse you like a mine or a mountain of fantastic food. But among our longings and our teeth, you change simply into cool light that slips in, turn into spring water that touched us once singing. And that is why you don't weigh us down in the siesta hour that's like an oven. You don't weigh us down, you just go by. And your heart, some cold ember, turned itself into a single drop of water. So an ode is addressed to something. An ode used to be done in some kind of to celebrate a hero in battle or a victory in a battle in classical writing. And this one in the 20th century and the 21st century, odes have been written to ordinary things like this one, like Robert Bly. Pablo Neruda wrote odes to all kinds of things. And you can write an ode to anything, and that's what you're going to be doing in a few minutes. So you can write an ode, to a pack of cards, you can write an ode to something you eat, an ode to Oreos, you can write an ode to absolutely anything. You can also write an ode to something that you do or did. This is from a poem by Kenneth Coe called Two Piano Lessons. You didn't do me any good, but being with you was like walking up the stairs of a building whose attic was June. how much promise there is in the arpeggios. You were a partner in an, this is the end of the poem, you were a partner in an enterprise that didn't work. We lost, but have moved on. So you can write a poem to something that you learnt and dropped, like piano lessons. You can do a poem to maths. I say maths because I didn't like maths at school. I was terrified of it because we had a very, very strict teacher, and I found it really hard. So you could do a poem to maths or a subject at school. And you can do a poem, as I said, to an object. And so you, in this poem, you're addressing something. So you talk about you, and you talk about it as though it's a living thing, even if it's not living. So if you're doing a sleeper now, the sleeper now, you were buried in the earth. But you've been buried in the earth for 50 years. What was it like to have trains? You know, so do you get it? And everyone nods. I can't see anybody, but I'm assuming this is okay. Please say if you don't get it, or if you want any clarification. But the idea here is to write, oh, great, that's, somebody said that's amazing, and wow. I guess that's to the watermelon poem. Does it have to be about only one thing? No, it doesn't, Atlas. That's a great question. And that brings me to something that Beatrix said. When she read out her poem, she said she didn't know whether she'd done what she was supposed to have done. I think something like that. The thing is with this, there are no rules. The aim of all these exercises is just to get you writing. I don't really mind what you do. If you ignored everything I said and wrote a different poem and wrote a great poem as a result of it, I'd be completely happy. That would be fine as far as I'm concerned. I'm giving you an idea, some ideas which you can work with, and some ways into writing that hopefully will enable you to write poems. And I really don't mind. You know, one of the things I like about poetry is that it can break the rules, that ultimately there are no rules for poetry that haven't been broken. Every rule has been broken. And you need to, and that's why this is playing with form rather than using form in poems. You take a form like the ode. The ode was always done in a very particular way. It was always in this very strict meter, very, very strict rhythm, with a certain number of lines, etc. And then with the romantic poets, with Keats and Wordsworth and people like that, they wrote these much more regular poems, but very, very different, much more personal poems. And then in the 20th century, 21st century, people like Neruda suddenly wrote them in a completely different way about ordinary things. And that one, Kenneth Coke, is obviously having a load of fun about writing about piano lessons. He wrote another one to his stammer. He used to stammer when he was younger, and he wrote a poem to his stammer, which he learned. He had psychoanalysis to lose his stammer, and he writes this poem to his stammer, saying what it was like when you were with me. So you can write a poem to anything. If you want to do the Neruda one, is really quite special, that the way he piles on those beautiful images. We haven't done much work on imagery in this workshop, but here's if you want to use a lot of images, this is one way of doing it. That you take a piece of fruit, for example, and you look at it, you have it in front of you, and you can kind of just write off the top of it all the things it reminds you of that it's like, and instead of saying like stars, you say you are stars in the sky. You address the thing as if it is these things. So I've given you plenty of ideas, so you can go away and write odes for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I think. But we're going to, I want everyone to actually have a go at writing one now. Choose at random any of these 3 things that you've written down earlier, or if you've got another idea, then just go with that and start writing as soon as you're ready. And Atlas, like about one thing, no, do it about as many things as you like. That's completely fine. And I'll give you a few minutes to do this, about 4 minutes or so. And you're not going to finish it, but start writing as soon as you're ready. Traditionally, a lot of odes started off with the word O, just the letter O, comma. And normally I say to people, don't use the word O in a poem because it's so archaic, but it can work really well for this one. O watermelon, or O piano lessons. All right, off you go. Okay, just a little longer now, about half a minute or so. Okay. It'd be great if somebody could read about what they wrote. I'd love to hear some, if anybody would like to read back either that poem or a previous one. Please put in chat if you'd like to. Atlas, great, lovely.
Hi.
Mm.
I thought I haven't actually read it over yet, but I thought I'd read out the one I wrote just then.
Great.
It was sort of a new idea that came out of what you were saying. Okay. It's called Ode to the Forgotten Things. Oh, where did you go? Far and out of touch, beyond recall of memory, to that misted place. Of all that I remember, of blissful childhood days, of imagined adventures and cherished tales, of dragons large and small, of chopsticks and chocolates and everything in between, I remember well and hold close. Though my memories have such wonder, I wonder of all the joys I forgot, who gather in the margins, who revel past the horizon, dancing doves and gargoyles. Tell me, where did you go?
Thanks, Atlas. Great, lovely. Thank you. The rhythms of that, and you read it beautifully. Really lovely, really interesting idea. The things that you've forgotten, things that you don't know. Great, great. One of the things I was going to do, which we haven't got time for, I've got actually a whole list of things, but never mind, is a list of, there's an exercise called I Remember, where you write down a list of memories, and a very interesting way of doing that is to write down what I don't remember. I don't remember. And the things that you don't remember are really kind of, it's really interesting what we don't remember, what we do remember, and what we don't remember. So you can take that, that's got so much material there, Atlas. You can go back to that and work with that. That's great. Thank you very much. Lovely. Is there anybody else that would like to read back? Great, Sally, go for it.
So this is when I did the free writing one. So this is just my free writing. So the first time I saw a waterfall, I cried. The falling water on the rock's face matched the falling water on mine. It kept coming. My tears were torrential. Rivers formed on my cheeks. My face crumbled and fell as I turned to water. That's it.
Wow. That's lovely, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So it's actually come to the end of the time at the moment. So has anybody got any last questions? Would anybody like to ask anything about anything we've done? Or say anything? You can put it in chat or say if you want to just put in chat if you want to say something. Oh yeah, the impression I've got is we don't have to worry too much about punctuation. Am I right about that? That's a really good question. My suggestion, Lindsay, is to experiment with punctuation. Experiment and see what happens. You find it liberating not to worry about it. Yeah, it is liberating. It changes the way you write not to think about punctuation. Try free writing, and when you do the free writing, resist putting in punctuation. Deliberately don't punctuate anything, even the capital I for I, and see what it does to the writing. It really makes a difference. And then go back to putting in punctuation. Oscar Wilde said something was the effect that he spent half a day taking out, when he's working on his writing, half a day putting in a semicolon and the next half a day taking the semicolon out. And although I know what he means, when I write a poem, I spend ages on the punctuation, and I kind of go back to it and fiddle around with it, and the line breaks a little bit, tweaking it. And just see what happens. Just see what happens. There are no strict rules about punctuation, and it depends on the poem. Sometimes I look at a poem when someone shows me a poem and I'll say that you can try that without punctuation, see what it does. It simply doesn't need punctuation. So try it without and see whether you like it more. Another poem definitely does need punctuation. It just works much better with it. Or you can do what Frank O'Hara does and use punctuation selectively. You have to be quite clever to do that. It seems counterintuitive, but you do have. A friend of mine teaches at university, and he was telling me with his students to either leave it out or put it in, because when you put a little bit of punctuation in, you have to really know what you're doing. But I suggest you just experiment and see what works for you. Experiment with that. I think the message of this, what I wanted to get over, is that there's a whole variety of forms out there which open. They're like doors opening for you. The ode has got so much potential. The occasional poem has got so much potential. So is the sonnet, which we didn't have time for. The letter poem, addressing poems to people. They're ways of opening doors. So check them out. And check them out and go your own way. Say, okay, does it like this? This poet doesn't like this, but what if I do it like this? And give yourself permission to just try with and without punctuation, see what works for you. Great. Lindsay, I love that opening doors image. Many thanks. That's great. Yeah, it's true. It should be like that. Writing poems is a fantastic. Some Atlas, it's like poems are living things that each want different things. Yeah, that's true, Atlas. A poem is like a living thing. It's a really funny thing that when you start writing a poem, you have a certain intention, and then what happens is that the poem sort of takes over. And the question I ask myself is, what does this poem need? What does this poem need? What does this poem need me to do? And the poems come with their own characters, really, and treat them like that, you know. And when they find their form, particularly, they get their own form. And then I wrote poems a few years ago. When I look at them, I just can't change the form. There's no way I can change them. They're kind of settled into that, and that's the way they are. They're really quite defined. There are others which every time I publish them in different anthologies, I'll make some slight changes to them. They haven't quite found it yet, but I'll still make, and I don't mind that. I don't think there's one final answer to any poem, really. A poem can carry on evolving, and there's never a time when I will think, oh, that poem is definitely done, apart from the poems that have decided that think, actually, that poem is probably there now. I might make 1 or 2 tweaks, but it's there. Great.
Cliff, I think that's a perfect place to finish this. In fact, I think that was such a fantastic comment from Atlas about them being living things, and then you talking about them constantly, or the possibility of them constantly evolving and being able to grow with you. I think that's yeah, really tremendous. If there's anyone wants to say anything just at the last minute, but we're actually over our last minute now, so we've done pretty well. Was there anything else you wanted to say there, Cliff? I kind of interrupted you. I broke in there.
No, I think, like you said, that was a good place to start. I just want to say good luck to everyone. Actually, good luck with your writing. Just keep writing. Write as much as you can, and don't judge too much. The thing is not to be too critical. You need to turn off the critic when you're writing. Everyone thinks, you know, especially in these sessions, there are only a few people here this afternoon. I'll just put that because it's going to be on YouTube, isn't it? And so there's not a pressure on those few people to read back, and
yes.
So there weren't many people there, but actually it is quite pressure to read something. Sometimes when you're reading, you listen to other people and think, that was so amazing. I couldn't write anything like that. Mine is rubbish compared with that. And then I tell people to read their stuff anyway, even if it's rubbish, and they read theirs out, and everyone else says, wow, that's really good. So it's really hard to judge how good your work is. So you need to turn off the critic and just write when you're writing, and don't let that critic in the room. Just shut them out. Jani Hauker, I met her, a novelist. You might have read her books. She says she sees the critic as like a person. She doesn't allow them in the cottage. They're not allowed in. You know, it's like this kind of thing outside. So don't criticize so much. Just go with it and enjoy it.
That's excellent advice, to turn off the critic. It really is, and I really am. I'm as ever so thankful for this session. It was really wonderful, Cliff. Really tremendous. We thoroughly enjoyed it. I know that we had a very lovely select group here, and they were tremendous. I mean, once again, in awe of everything that you managed to do in this time, and really making the most of what is a tremendous opportunity. So I loved the poem, the Frank O'Hara poem. I loved the poems that were read, Bees and Atlas's and Sally's poems. Really tremendous. Yeah, just wonderful stuff. So I hope you'll come back and join us again, those of you who joined us this time. Thank you once again to Cliff. I'm just going to say a quick word about next week's webinar, which will be with Niall Campbell next Wednesday, and he's leading a session on sounds and rhythm. Okay, and you'll get the information about that coming out in the newsletter. But final time, huge thanks to Cliff Yates for a fantastic session, and a huge round of virtual applause to all of you, our Scotland Young Makars, who were there as our attendees. I'm going to end this session now, finish the recording, and thank you very much to all of you. Have a great week, and hopefully see you again soon. Bye for now.